The first clap of thunder hit like a gavel, rattling the wide windows of Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. Danielle Brooks barely blinked. Her champagne glass trembled in her hand, but it wasn't the storm that made the bubbles jump, it was the voice that had just cut through the cabin. "Ma'am, I'm afraid we can't accommodate your request." Every head in first class turned, curious but pretending not to stare. Danielle kept her eyes on the pale gold liquid swirling in her flute, hiding the flicker of disbelief that crossed her face. The woman speaking wore a crisp navy uniform and a smile as sharp as broken glass. It wasn't the first time someone tried to dress disrespect as policy, but tonight, it landed different. Outside, lightning flashed against the wet tarmac, throwing quicksilver light across the cabin. The seatbelt sign dinged, but the real pressure sat heavy in the air. Danielle's heart beat steady, each thud like a quiet drum warning of a fight she didn't ask for. Then a second blow. Another attendant leaned in close, lowering her voice. "You'll need to move your bag." Security flagged it for a random check. Random. Danielle knew that word. Corporate America loved it. Random meant you, but nobody would say why. 2 strikes before takeoff, both cloaked in procedure. "Here's the question I need you to answer. If money could buy a first-class seat, why couldn't it buy simple respect?" Hours earlier, Danielle had arrived at the airport like any other traveler, designer carry-on in hand, her tailored charcoal coat soaking up the misty Georgia rain. To anyone watching, she was just another well-dressed passenger. They didn't see the quiet empire behind her, a billion-dollar tech company that built the software running half the smartphones in the lounge around her. Power like hers didn't wear a crown, it wore calm eyes and an unshakable posture. The lounge had smelled of polished wood and roasted coffee, but the warmth didn't reach the staff's smiles. Her boarding pass was scanned once, then again as if her name might change mid-swipe. A gate agent asked for a second ID just to be sure, even though her passport sat open in plain view. Danielle gave them both, license and passport, without a word. Years in boardrooms had taught her the sharp edge of silence. Now, as she settled into seat 2A, rain streaked down the oval window like silver threads, the hum of engines rising underfoot. Around her, first-class passengers laughed softly, clinking glasses of white wine. Their meals were already being discussed in warm, easy tones. But in Danielle's chest, the storm outside had already crossed the glass. The captain's voice crackled through the speakers, cheerful and routine. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 729 to Los Angeles. We're expecting a smooth ride after we clear the weather." Smooth. Danielle almost smiled. Nothing about tonight felt smooth. A sharp scent of citrus cleaner cut through the cabin air as the lead attendant passed again, this time glancing at Danielle's untouched champagne. A flicker of something, disdain, flashed in her eyes before she moved on. Danielle caught it, filed it, and let the silence stretch. Outside, the storm broke open, sheets of rain pounding the fuselage. The plane trembled once, twice, like a living thing trying to shake off the night. Danielle rested her palm on the armrest, steady as stone. Because deep down, she knew this wasn't just turbulence. And in the next hour, someone on this flight was going to learn exactly who they had chosen to underestimate. The intercom dinged again, softer this time. A flight attendant's voice floated through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a small update before takeoff." The pause that followed was long enough to taste. Danielle tightened her grip on the glass. Whatever came next wasn't on the menu. The storm outside Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson hissed against the terminal windows like it was warning her. Danielle Brooks stepped into the gate area with the quiet elegance of someone used to private jets but choosing commercial tonight. Her black trench coat caught a faint sparkle from the overhead lights, but the stares didn't sparkle back. A few passengers looked up, then down again, like her presence had bent the air. The gate agent's smile was professional but too tight, the kind you give a problem you can't name. "Boarding pass, please." The scanner beeped once, then again, louder, like a false alarm meant to call attention. The agent said, frowning at the perfectly valid ticket. "Let's just check your ID again." "Operational necessity." The words were smooth, but the second scan burned like a spotlight. Danielle handed over her ID without a word. Years in boardrooms had taught her that silence can be sharper than argument. Around her, first-class passengers shifted, pretending to scroll their phones while sneaking glances. One man cleared his throat too loudly. A woman whispered something behind a manicured hand. None of them smiled. Danielle felt the weight of invisible questions. Does she belong up there? The gate agent finally forced a cheerier tone. "Thank you for your discretion. Enjoy your experience." But the delay had done its work. Danielle walked down the jet bridge under a rain of unspoken judgments, the hiss of the storm now matched by the low hiss of whispers behind her. Inside the plane, the luxury of first class looked like a commercial for comfort. Soft leather seats, champagne waiting on silver trays, warm towels folded like tiny clouds. Yet the air carried a static charge that clung to her skin. A uniformed figure stepped forward. Karen Whitfield, the lead flight attendant. Blonde hair pulled into a perfect knot, smile polished to a corporate shine. "Welcome aboard," Karen said, but the warmth never reached her eyes. Her gaze flicked over Danielle's tailored coat, her natural curls, her skin, and landed back on the boarding pass as if searching for a reason to question it. "Seat 2A, correct? Well, I'll make sure you're comfortable." The pause before comfortable was thin as paper but sharp as glass. Danielle nodded, her heartbeat steady even as the cabin doors sealed with a heavy thunk. The storm outside rumbled again, echoing the tension inside. Somewhere beyond that polite smile, a decision was already forming, one that would turn a routine flight into a quiet battleground. As Danielle moved toward her seat, Karen leaned slightly toward another attendant, her lips barely moving. Danielle caught only 3 words, soft but deliberate: "Keep an eye." The cabin lights dimmed just a shade, and Danielle knew this night was about to test more than her patience. Danielle stepped into the first-class cabin and felt the shift immediately. The air smelled faintly of leather and chilled champagne, but beneath the luxury was a current of something colder. A steward held back her coat a beat too long before hanging it, his eyes flicking to her face as if to double-check that she belonged here. No words, just a pause sharp enough to sting. She slid into seat 2A, the window seat she'd chosen for quiet. The cushions were soft, but the silence around her had an edge. Across the aisle a businessman nodded politely, then glanced away as if her presence required no acknowledgement. Danielle set her bag under the seat and reached for the call button, only to see a flight attendant glide past without noticing. Or maybe pretending not to. The cabin hummed with low conversation and clinking glasses. Orders for sparkling water and Bordeaux floated through the air, but her drink request went unanswered. Minutes passed. The engines rumbled. She felt every second stretch like a test. How long would she wait before demanding the service her ticket promised? Years of boardroom battles had trained her for moments like this. Silence, she knew, could be a weapon sharper than any raised voice. The lead flight attendant, Karen Whitfield, her name stitched in neat silver letters, finally approached. Her smile was professional, bright enough for a photo, but it never reached her eyes. "Can I help you, ma'am?" The slight pause before the honorific was barely audible, yet it carried the weight of an entire history. Danielle answered with a calm nod, asking for the champagne already poured for others. Karen jotted a note without a word and disappeared. Outside, rain streaked the window as ground crew scurried beneath the floodlights. Inside, the tension tightened. Each delayed service, each sidelong glance, felt less like accident and more like message. Danielle's heart beat steady, but her mind ticked like a clock. This was a cross-country flight, hours trapped with people who had already decided her worth. She leaned back, eyes on the dim ceiling panel, and wondered how far they would go. Would it stop at slow service? Or was something worse waiting behind the polished smiles? As the cabin door sealed with a heavy thud, a thought cut through the engine's growl. Once this plane left the ground, escape would be impossible. And then the captain's voice crackled over the intercom with a welcome so cheerful it felt rehearsed. Right before a sudden metallic clink sounded from behind her seat, a sound no passenger should ever hear before takeoff. The smell of warm butter and seared lobster floated through the cabin like a promise. Silver trays glided down the aisle, each plate a quiet announcement of wealth. Perfectly roasted vegetables, lemon wedges shining under soft cabin lights, champagne refills catching the glow. Danielle Brooks watched the service approach with the calm of someone who had paid for this comfort. Her boarding pass tucked neatly in the seat pocket, her dignity folded tighter inside her chest. When the attendant reached her row, the pattern broke. Karen Whitfield leaned close, her smile crisp enough to slice. "I'm so sorry, ma'am," she said, voice dipped in a syrupy politeness that felt more like a dare. "We've run out of the first-class entree. Operational necessity. We'll have to offer you a substitute from economy." The words hung in the air like turbulence. Danielle blinked once, her eyes sliding to the untouched lobster plates being served across the aisle. A man 2 seats over was on his second glass of wine, his plate steaming with the very entree Karen claimed was gone. Inside, heat crawled up Danielle's spine. Outside she stayed still. "What options are available?" she asked, her voice steady, measured, the way she sounded when negotiating billion-dollar contracts. Karen's smile didn't waver. A turkey sandwich. It's quite satisfying. The pause before the last word landed like a challenge. The sandwich arrived on a plain tray, its plastic wrap crinkling like an insult. The bread was pale, the slices uneven. Danielle peeled back the wrapper and took a slow, deliberate bite. The turkey was dry, the lettuce limp, but it wasn't the taste that burned. It was the way the cabin seemed to notice. Across the aisle, a woman whispered behind her menu. A businessman pretended to check emails while sneaking a glance at Danielle's plate. Every chew felt heavier than the last. This wasn't a meal. It was a message. And the crew wanted her to read it. She set the sandwich down and reached for her glass of water. The ice clinked sharply against the plastic, a sound that cut through the soft murmur of first-class conversation. Karen lingered a few rows back, eyes flicking toward Danielle, then away. Danielle's mind sharpened. Years in boardrooms had trained her to hear what people didn't say. Operational necessity, a phrase she'd used herself when masking decisions too ugly to name. This wasn't a shortage. It was strategy. The engines hummed a steady rhythm beneath her feet, a reminder that she was trapped thousands of feet in the air, sealed inside a cabin where discretion doubled as control. She thought of speaking up, of calling Karen back and demanding the service she'd paid for. But another thought landed harder. They want a reaction. So she stayed silent. Her power tonight would be patience. As the dessert cart rolled past without slowing, a faint vibration shivered through the floor. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, cheerful and practiced. But beneath the static, Danielle heard something else, a sharp metallic clink like a latch coming undone. She turned toward the galley just in time to see a junior attendant glance her way, eyes wide with something that looked like fear. And then, as Karen reached for the cabin phone, Danielle caught a flash of folded paper in the attendant's trembling hand, paper that seemed meant for her. The cabin lights dimmed to a warm evening glow, but the air felt sharper now, edged with something unsaid. Danielle Brooks sat perfectly upright in seat 2A, her hands folded over the tray that still held the half-eaten economy sandwich. Around her, whispers rose like tiny sparks in a dry field, soft enough to hide, loud enough to sting. Across the aisle, a man in a navy suit tilted his phone as if checking emails, but the camera lens glinted for half a second before he looked away. A woman 2 rows ahead leaned toward her companion, shielding her mouth with a glossy magazine. Their eyes flicked back, quick and guilty. The silence wasn't silent anymore. It buzzed, a low hum of judgment and curiosity. Danielle could feel it in her chest, the way strangers decided stories about her without a single word spoken. To them she wasn't a billionaire or a CEO. She was just the black woman singled out by the crew, quietly humiliated over dinner. Each sideways glance landed like a question she couldn't answer aloud. Karen Whitfield, the lead attendant, moved down the aisle with a smile polished to perfection. She refilled champagne flutes, asked about dessert, never once looking Danielle's way. The tray of untouched lobster plates rolled past again, steam curling into the air like a taunt. Danielle kept her face smooth, eyes forward. Years of boardroom battles had trained her to turn discomfort into armor. But inside, a slow fire built with every secret photo and whispered exchange. The humiliation wasn't private anymore. It was entertainment. A sudden ding broke the quiet, a call light pressed somewhere behind her. Karen's head snapped up. Passengers turned in unison. For a split second, all eyes left Danielle. She exhaled, a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Then the junior attendant, the one who'd been avoiding her gaze all night, stepped into the aisle. His hand trembled slightly as he reached toward Danielle's tray, a folded piece of paper barely visible between his fingers. Before he could speak, Karen's voice cut through the cabin, sharp and too bright. "Everything all right here?" The note hovered inches from Danielle's hand, and the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. The hum of the engines became a steady metronome, each vibration a reminder of the hours still locked inside this flying theater. Danielle Brooks sat perfectly still, her back pressed against the soft leather seat, eyes fixed on the faint reflection in the dark window. To anyone watching she looked calm, maybe even bored. Inside, her thoughts moved like a quiet storm. She replayed the dinner scene in her mind, every clipped word, every sideways glance. Years of boardroom warfare had taught her the oldest corporate truth. People show you who they are when they think you can't fight back. Karen Whitfield had made that mistake. The others had joined the performance with their silence, the way investors sometimes let a junior partner burn while they observe market behavior. Danielle knew the script and she refused to give them the scene they wanted. "They're testing me," she thought. Waiting for the angry black woman, the loud complaint, the headline they can call a misunderstanding. Her fingers brushed the edge of her ticket, the paper soft from being held too long. One call to her legal team could turn this flight into a public reckoning before they even landed. But power, she reminded herself, isn't always about speed. Sometimes it's about timing. She pictured the faces of men who once underestimated her in venture meetings, smiles fading when they realized the quiet woman across the table controlled the deal. Silence had always been her sharpest tool. Tonight it would cut deeper than any confrontation. A soft chime broke her thoughts. The seatbelt sign flickered on though the air was smooth. Karen appeared at the front of the cabin, speaking in low tones to the captain through the crack of the cockpit door. Danielle caught the quick, worried glance Karen shot over her shoulder before disappearing inside. The engines droned on, steady and cold. Danielle's heartbeat matched their rhythm. Something was shifting behind that door, something no passenger could see. And then the lights dimmed a shade darker, just as a shadow moved quietly down the aisle toward her seat. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft midnight blue, the kind that blurs time and hides intentions. Outside, clouds swallowed the moon, leaving only the steady hum of engines to mark the miles between Atlanta and Los Angeles. Danielle leaned back against the cool leather of seat 2A, her hands folded neatly in her lap, but inside her chest a slow fire burned. Hours had passed since the dry sandwich, hours of fake smiles and careful silence. The rest of first class dozed in champagne comfort, but for Danielle the night felt like a quiet interrogation she hadn't agreed to. A soft shuffle broke the monotony. Someone was moving toward her row, careful not to wake the sleeping passengers. Danielle opened her eyes just as a young flight attendant, barely more than a girl, paused beside her seat. Her face was pale, her eyes flicking nervously toward the galley. She clutched something small in her hand. "Ma'am," the attendant whispered, her voice barely audible over the engine's low growl. I'm sorry to disturb you, but," she glanced over her shoulder. "This is for you." Before Danielle could respond, a folded slip of paper slid onto her tray table, the movement quick and almost furtive. The attendant straightened, her eyes shining with something like fear. "Please, just read it." Danielle's pulse quickened. She waited until the attendant slipped away, her shoes silent against the carpet before reaching for the note. The paper was thin, the crease sharp. She unfolded it with steady hands, though her mind raced ahead. The message was short, written in a hurried scrawl. "Ma'am, we have your meal. We were told not to serve you. I'm sorry." That was it. No name. No explanation. Just a quiet confession that ripped through the silence like turbulence. Danielle stared at the words, her breath catching in her throat. The shortage was a lie. Someone had given an order, a deliberate, calculated decision to deny her what every other passenger received. Her first instinct was disbelief. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe the attendant misunderstood. But the memory of Karen's cool eyes and practiced apology cut through those excuses like a knife. Danielle pictured the untouched lobster plates glistening under warm lights just a few seats away. She thought of the double ID check at the gate, the delayed coat service, the way Karen's smile had tightened whenever their eyes met. Each moment replayed in her mind like pieces of a puzzle she hadn't wanted to solve. What? The question pulsed louder than the engines. Was it petty racism cloaked in airline policy? A power play meant to humiliate her quietly? Or something deeper, an internal sabotage she hadn't yet uncovered? Danielle folded the note carefully, sliding it into the pocket of her blazer like evidence. Her face remained calm, a mask perfected over years of hostile boardrooms and backhanded compliments. They wanted a reaction. They wanted her to rise, to shout, to give them a scene they could dismiss as emotional. Instead, she pressed her back to the seat and closed her eyes, letting silence sharpen into strategy. But her mind refused rest. Questions swirled like turbulence. Who gave the order? How high did this go? And most dangerous of all, how would she answer when the time came? Across the aisle, Karen moved briskly, laughing lightly with another passenger as if nothing had happened. Yet Danielle caught a fleeting glance, a quick flick of the eyes toward her seat before looking away. A glance that wasn't fear, it was control. Danielle inhaled slowly, steadying her heartbeat. She would wait. 4 hours still remained before landing. 4 hours for the truth to reveal itself. 4 hours for her next move to take shape. And then, faint but clear, came another sound, the same nervous attendant's voice over the intercom, calling for the captain. Why would a junior attendant summon the captain in the dead of night, and what new twist was about to unfold before the plane even touched the ground? The cabin felt colder now, though the thermostat hadn't changed. Danielle Brooks sat motionless in seat 2A, the folded note hidden in the inner pocket of her blazer. Around her, the first-class cabin looked peaceful. Soft lights, quiet conversations, clinking glasses. But underneath that calm, something sharp moved. You could almost hear it if you listened past the engines. A low current of whispers carrying secrets from row to row. She studied every detail the way she would scan a quarterly report. Across the aisle, a silver-haired businessman leaned toward his companion, his lips barely moving as his eyes darted toward Danielle. 2 seats back, a woman pretended to scroll her phone, but the camera stayed angled too high, catching more of Danielle than the menu screen. Even the captain's door cracked open for a split second, revealing a slice of uniform and a quick glance before shutting again. Nothing obvious. Nothing you could prove. But every small gesture hummed with quiet intent. Karen Whitfield glided through the aisle with that same bright, brittle smile. She refilled champagne for one passenger, adjusted a pillow for another, yet never once met Danielle's gaze. Her movements were too controlled, like someone performing for an invisible audience. Danielle noticed the slight stiffness in Karen's shoulders, the way her hand trembled when she lifted a bottle. Fear maybe. Or guilt. Near the galley, the young attendant who'd slipped the note peeked out, eyes wide and cautious. Their gaze met for half a heartbeat before she ducked back behind the curtain. Danielle caught the message in that glance. You're not imagining this. Questions swirled like turbulence. Who gave the order to withhold the meal? Was this quiet cruelty the work of one woman, or a directive that climbed higher up the chain? Was Karen protecting a policy, or protecting herself? Danielle's mind raced through possibilities. A rogue crew member, an unspoken operational necessity, maybe even someone inside the airline testing her without knowing who she really was. She adjusted her seatbelt, every movement deliberate. Silence had always been her sharpest weapon, and tonight it was cutting deeper than any outburst. Still, a single thought beat louder than the engines. They know something you don't. Then, without warning, the intercom crackled to life. A calm male voice, steady, official, called for the lead flight attendant to report to the cockpit immediately. The cabin fell silent, every whisper swallowed in an instant. Danielle's eyes followed Karen as she stiffened, turned, and disappeared behind the cockpit door. The door sealed with a soft click. And for the first time all night, Danielle felt the plane tilt, not in the air but in power. The cabin lights had dimmed to a sleepy glow, but Danielle Brooks was wide awake. Outside, the sky was black silk streaked with lightning, each flash revealing the silver curve of the wing. Inside, the air smelled faintly of reheated meals and expensive perfume, a quiet reminder of the class divide she had paid to escape but could still feel pressing against her skin. For 4 endless hours, the engines hummed a low, steady note that matched the rhythm of her thoughts. Every time she closed her eyes, the junior attendant's note flickered back into view. We were told not to serve you. 5 words that turned a simple meal into a coded threat. She tried to imagine who had whispered the order, who thought it was acceptable to humiliate a paying customer, let alone someone who controlled the company behind the ticket. Across the aisle, Karen Whitfield moved like a shadow in the dark. Even as passengers drifted into sleep, Karen kept adjusting pillows, pouring water, checking call lights that hadn't been pressed. Danielle watched her carefully, noting the stiffness in her shoulders, the way she avoided seat 2A like it radiated heat. Every small movement felt rehearsed, like a performance for someone unseen. Danielle tapped her phone, pretending to check messages. Instead, she snapped silent photos, the untouched lobster plates in the galley, the folded note now hidden under her armrest, Karen's icy glances. Evidence. Not for social media. Danielle had bigger plans. Silence, she knew, could be louder than any public outburst. Time stretched. The hum of the engines became a metronome of strategy. She pictured the boardrooms where policies like operational necessity were drafted, vague words used to excuse discrimination. Would they call this a random catering shortage if she confronted them? Or would Karen simply vanish behind a wall of corporate discretion? At 36,000 feet, Danielle was both trapped and untouchable. Her mind rehearsed every possible landing scenario, a quiet walk off the plane, a sharp conversation with the captain, or a move so bold it would leave the entire airline gasping. Each plan sharpened the fire in her chest. Somewhere behind the cockpit door, the captain's voice crackled softly on the crew intercom, too low to catch, but sharp enough to make Karen glance toward the front with sudden tension. Danielle leaned back, eyes half closed, pretending to sleep as the door clicked open for a split second. A shadow stepped into the aisle. Someone was coming for her. The landing gear groaned as Flight 729 descended through the low California clouds. A ripple of polite applause rose from the cabin, that familiar first-class ritual meant to mark a safe arrival. But for Danielle, the sound wasn't relief, it was a countdown. Every clap felt like a second ticking off the clock she'd been watching all night. 4 hours of quiet fire now narrowed to a single choice: speak or stay silent. Karen Whitfield moved through the aisle with the same icy smile she'd worn since Atlanta. Her voice floated above the engine hum, cheerful but sharp at the edges. "Thank you for choosing our airline. We hope you enjoyed your experience." Experience? The word scraped like metal against Danielle's nerves. What kind of experience was being denied a meal you paid thousands for, while strangers across the aisle cracked lobster shells? Passengers gathered their bags, sneaking glances at seat 2A. Some still whispered about the note. Others pretended nothing had happened. Danielle sat motionless, fingers resting on the leather armrest, mind racing through her next move. She could call the press. She could demand the captain. She could end careers before sunrise. But the power of silence still tempted her. Boardrooms had taught her that a quiet storm can be deadliest. Karen leaned in one final time, lowering her voice. "Hope the rest of your evening goes better than this flight." A smirk, quick and cruel, flashed like a blade. Danielle met her eyes but gave no reply. Not yet. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Doors clicked open. The scent of jet fuel and wet pavement drifted in from the gate. Danielle rose, slow and deliberate, every movement a promise. The crew thought the night was over. They had no idea it was just beginning. If this happened to you, would you stay silent or speak out? Comment below. Your voice might be the one thing they can't ignore. Danielle stepped into the narrow aisle, her black carry-on rolling behind her, heart steady as the captain's shadow appeared at the door. He was waiting. And he knew her name. What he said next would change the fate of everyone on that crew. The cabin lights snapped from soft blue to bright white, a signal for everyone to leave. Passengers unbuckled and reached for their bags, eager to escape the stale air and the quiet tension that had followed the entire flight. Danielle stayed seated for a beat, letting the shuffle of coats and carry-ons pass her by. Her fingers tightened around the smooth leather of her purse. Outside, the night waited like a question she was ready to answer. Karen Whitfield appeared in the aisle, her professional smile stretched so tight it looked painful. "Thank you for flying with us," she chirped, voice sugar-coated but sharp beneath. She stepped closer, leaning just enough to block Danielle's path. "Hope you had a comfortable experience." The pause before comfortable carried the weight of a dare. Danielle met her eyes with a calm so still it felt dangerous. "It was educational," she said, her tone quiet but etched. No raised voice, no visible anger, just a slow burn that made Karen shift her stance. The line of passengers thinned until only a few remained. Danielle finally rose, her heels clicking against the carpet like a metronome counting down to something unseen. The junior attendant who had delivered the secret note earlier stood near the exit, eyes flicking nervously between the two women. Her lips parted as if she wanted to apologize again, but she stayed silent. The jet bridge smelled of rain-soaked concrete and engine fuel. Danielle stepped into it, the cool night air brushing her face. That's when the captain emerged from the cockpit, his hat tucked under one arm and a rehearsed smile fixed in place. "Ma'am," he said, voice smooth but careful, "we hope you'll consider flying with us again. Tonight's service did not reflect our usual standards." He glanced at Karen, whose jaw tightened at the word service. Danielle didn't stop walking. The captain quickened his pace, falling in beside her as if trying to contain a storm he didn't understand. At the midpoint of the jet bridge, Danielle paused. The metal floor hummed with the vibration of luggage carts below. She reached into her bag, fingers brushing the cool edge of a small black case. Slowly, she pulled out a single card, matte black, edges silver, the logo embossed so clean it caught the overhead lights. Karen's eyes narrowed. The captain tilted his head, confusion flashing across his face. Danielle held the card between two fingers, the way a queen might hold a chess piece before checkmate. She turned it just enough for the captain to see the emblem. His smile faltered. The logo on the card matched the one painted across the tail of the very plane they had just flown. Danielle said nothing. Not yet. The silence pressed down like cabin pressure at 30,000 feet. Karen's breath hitched, the sound barely audible over the echo of departing footsteps. The captain's throat worked as if swallowing words he no longer trusted. Is there something we should know?" he asked, voice lower now, stripped of its easy charm. Danielle's eyes stayed locked on his. Her answer was a whisper meant to slice. "Yes. But you'll hear it in a moment." She slipped the card back into her purse and stepped forward, leaving the captain frozen and Karen pale as the fluorescent lights above them flickered. What Danielle was about to reveal would not just end careers, it would rewrite the entire night. The next step of the jet bridge led not only to the terminal but to a revelation that would silence the entire crew before sunrise. The jet bridge smelled of rain and jet fuel, a cold reminder that the storm outside hadn't finished its work. Karen Whitfield stood frozen halfway between the cabin and the terminal, her polished smile trembling as Danielle Brooks faced her. Behind them, the captain shifted uncomfortably, hat tucked beneath his arm, eyes flicking toward the passengers still lingering to catch a glimpse of the confrontation. Phones hovered in quiet anticipation, red record lights glowing like tiny warning signals. Danielle didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. From her purse, she drew a single matte black business card, its silver edges catching the harsh fluorescent lights. With a slow, deliberate motion, she held it up between two fingers, the way a judge might hold a verdict. The captain leaned forward first, curiosity breaking through his professional mask. Then his eyes locked on the embossed logo and widened in a flash of recognition. It was the same emblem painted across the aircraft's tail. The very brand that had carried them across the country. Karen's breath hitched. Her practiced customer service tone faltered. "Is this some kind of complaint?" she asked, but the question wobbled in the air, thin and unsure. Danielle's gaze never left the captain. "This isn't a complaint," she said softly, each word slicing through the hum of the bridge. "It's a reminder of who keeps this airline in the sky." A hush spread down the metal walkway. The junior attendant who had slipped Danielle the secret note stepped closer, eyes wide, lips parting as if to whisper, "I knew it." The captain cleared his throat, but no words followed. His posture, once stiff with authority, seemed to shrink with each passing second. Karen tried again, her voice brittle. You're a frequent flyer?" Danielle tilted the card so the silver logo glinted like a blade. "I'm more than that," she said. "I'm the majority owner of this airline." The words landed like turbulence no seatbelt could brace against. A gasp rippled from the small cluster of passengers still recording, the sound echoing against the metal walls. Karen's face drained of color. The captain's jaw tightened, a faint tremor breaking his careful composure. Danielle stepped forward, slipping the card back into her purse with surgical precision. "Now," she said, voice low but unshakable, "let's talk about tonight's experience." The captain inhaled sharply as if bracing for impact. But before he could answer, a new voice cut through the silence from the terminal entrance. A voice that didn't belong to any passenger or crew. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the jet bridge, carrying a single command that froze everyone where they stood. The cabin door stayed open, but the air inside felt locked, heavy with the weight of what had just been revealed. Passengers who had lingered to catch the drama now held their phones higher, their screens glowing like a wall of tiny spotlights. Danielle Brooks stood calm in the center of the first-class aisle, the soft hum of the cooling engines behind her, the storm outside still throwing flashes of lightning across the dark Los Angeles runway. Karen Whitfield's polished smile was gone. Her eyes darted from the passengers to the captain and back again, as if she could still escape the moment. But there was no exit now. Danielle slipped her black business card back into her purse and spoke in a voice so steady it carried farther than any shout. "Captain," she said, her words slicing through the low murmur of the cabin. "As of this landing, this crew is relieved of duty. HR will contact each of you within the hour. Do not report for the next flight." For a breathless second, no one moved. Then the captain straightened, his jaw tightening as the meaning sank in. A single, "Yes, ma'am," escaped before he lowered his eyes. The junior attendant, the same one who had dared to pass the note, covered her mouth, equal parts shock and relief flickering across her face. Karen tried to recover, her voice trembling. "Miss Brooks, surely there's a protocol." "There is," Danielle interrupted, calm but unyielding. "It's called operational necessity. And right now, the necessity is accountability." Gasps rolled down the aisle like a slow wave. The sound of typing fingers followed as passengers blasted their feeds with real-time updates. Every movement, every breath became evidence. Danielle didn't flinch. She knew the cameras weren't a threat, they were leverage. Karen opened her mouth again, but the captain stepped between them, his posture now protective of Danielle rather than his own crew. "Orders received," he said firmly, signaling to the gate agents outside. The silence that followed was louder than any argument. Danielle held it, letting the crew feel the emptiness of their own actions. No raised voice, no grand speech, only the quiet power of consequence. As the last passenger slipped past with a whispered "justice," the storm outside cracked once more, lightning flashing across the jet bridge. Somewhere beyond the door, hurried footsteps approached, echoing against the metal floor. A new figure was coming, fast. And with that sudden sound, everyone in the cabin turned, wondering who else had just entered Danielle Brooks's quiet war. By the time Danielle's car slid away from the terminal, the story had already slipped out of the cabin and into the bloodstream of the internet. Someone had uploaded a 30-second clip to X, formerly Twitter, showing Karen's frozen face as Danielle handed the captain that black business card. The caption was simple but explosive: "First-class racism meets first-class power." Within minutes, the video spread like jet fuel on dry asphalt. Phones across the country lit up. Hashtags multiplied. Hashtag first-class racism, hashtag power speaks, hashtag seat 2A. Some users demanded Karen's arrest. Others tried to downplay it as a misunderstanding. Debate burned hotter than the runway lights. Was this about race, about corporate policy, or about a billionaire flexing her power? Comment sections became battlegrounds, every refresh a new skirmish. News outlets scrambled to verify details. Morning shows replayed the grainy clip on a loop, their anchors speaking in careful tones about operational necessity and customer experience. Airline spokespeople hid behind phrases like discretion and ongoing internal review. But no press release could smother the outrage or the curiosity. Inside private group chats, frequent flyers swapped their own quiet stories of subtle bias. "It's always the look before they speak," one wrote. Another admitted, "I keep receipts now. Screenshots save careers." Each post made the scandal feel bigger than one flight. It became a mirror for every silent humiliation passengers had ever swallowed. And through it all, Danielle said nothing. No tweets, no interviews, no carefully worded statement. Her silence only sharpened the mystery. Was she preparing a lawsuit? A company-wide purge? Or was she simply letting the world do the talking while she planned her next move? Commenters begged for answers. "If this happened to you," one viral post asked, "would you stay silent or go public?" Even allies argued about the best path forward, each refresh adding another layer of tension. But while the internet raged and speculated, Danielle sat somewhere unseen, her phone face down, a single unread message glowing across the screen, one that could change everything when she finally opened it. Morning broke over Los Angeles with a pale gold light, but Danielle Brooks kept the curtains of her hotel suite drawn. Outside, the city buzzed with the energy of a breaking scandal. News vans idled near the airport. Commentators dissected grainy passenger videos frame by frame, searching for meaning in every raised eyebrow and quiet pause. Her name trended on every platform, though she hadn't typed a single word. Danielle sat at the edge of the bed, phone face down, untouched coffee cooling beside her. She didn't need to read the headlines to know the world was talking. Overnight, the airline stock had dipped, then surged, investors reacting to whispers of a leadership shakeup. Reporters begged for statements. Activists demanded public accountability. But Danielle understood something most of them didn't. Sometimes silence is the sharpest weapon. In the boardrooms of Silicon Valley, she'd learned that power rarely needs a microphone. A well-placed pause can move markets faster than a press release. A single unsigned order can rewrite careers. Her decision on that jet bridge had been swift, but it wasn't impulsive. It was the result of years of watching subtle slights pile into quiet mountains, of being told in polished corporate language that her presence was unexpected, her achievements impressive for someone like you. Now, as hashtags like hashtag first-class racism and hashtag power speaks ricocheted across screens, Danielle chose the one move that no one could spin or dilute: restraint. She wouldn't feed the outrage machine. She wouldn't let Karen Whitfield become a martyr or a meme. The crew's termination would speak for itself, and the world would draw its own conclusions. Her phone vibrated again, board members requesting an emergency call, journalists offering primetime slots, an advocacy group asking for her voice. Danielle let it ring. Instead, she opened her notebook and began to write, not a statement but a list. Training audits, diversity initiatives, hiring reforms. Her influence would be quiet but permanent, built into the bones of the company. Outside, a television anchor's voice carried faintly through the window. Why hasn't Danielle Brooks spoken out? The question floated through the glass like a dare. Danielle smiled, a small curve of understanding. Why speak when silence was already echoing louder than any press conference? She thought of the passengers who had watched in uneasy silence, of the junior attendant who slipped her the note, of the millions scrolling their feeds now, wondering if they'd have the courage to act when their own dignity was on the line. Power wasn't the firing of a crew. It was the lesson that came after, The slow, unsettling realization that money cannot buy respect, but it can build a future where respect is the default. Before heading to a closed-door meeting with her executive team, Danielle finally flipped her phone. A single unread message glowed on the screen: "Thank you for staying calm. You taught us more than words ever could." No name attached. Just quiet recognition. Imagine buying the most expensive seat on the plane and still being treated like you don't belong. Would you have stayed silent or would you have spoken out? Tell me in the comments. Stories like this must be heard. Subscribe so we can keep exposing them. Danielle closed the notebook, slipped her phone into her bag, and walked toward a day that would change the airline forever. The world could debate motives and hashtags. She had already written the ending without saying a word.